The year was 1883, deep in the northern wilderness where the trees stood older than the names men gave them. Winter came early that year, the kind that froze the air before dawn and kept it still until the last trace of daylight disappeared. People who lived out this far didn't expect comfort. They expected a struggle. They expected silence. And they expected to be left alone. In a place like this, secrets could sink into the snow and stay buried for years. The nearest town was called Birch Hollow, though most just called it Hollow, as if the rest of the name didn't matter. A few dozen wooden cabins stood scattered around a frozen lake. Smoke rose from chimneys every morning, and the sound of chopping wood echoed between trees. The townspeople were simple folk, trappers, loggers, widows, and men who drank too much because there was nothing else to do once the sun went down. Life was hard, but it was steady. And steady was enough to sleep at night. Everyone in Birch Hollow knew the value of fur. Pelts were money, warmth, and survival. A good trapper could earn more than a preacher, more than a sheriff, even if he was skilled and lucky. Fur traders came in once every few weeks, bringing coins and supplies. People waited for them like clockwork, lining up at dawn with bundles tied in rope. Most of the time, business was fair. But even then, no one trusted too easily. Not out here. Trust was something you earned one winter at a time. Among the trappers was a man who didn't talk much. He had a cabin deeper in the woods, farther than most would bother walking. Some called him a loner, others called him strange. But everyone agreed on one thing: he was good at what he did. Too good, maybe. His pelts were always perfect, thick, clean, without damage. No one knew how he kept them that way. Some said he set his traps like a hunter who understood things others didn't. Some said he knew the animals better than he knew people. And a few whispered something else. Maybe he didn't feel anything. Not pain, not fear, not guilt. At first, no one questioned him. In a place like Birch Hollow, you didn't ask questions you didn't want answers to, but people still watched. They noticed the way he carried himself, silent, with eyes that never stayed still for long. They noticed he rarely shared a drink at the tavern or joined in during town gatherings. He stood apart, like a shadow that was shaped like a man but didn't belong to the world around him. There were others, too, living their lives without knowing how close their paths were to crossing something dark. A woman who ran the small trading post, used to handling rough men but still wishing for company that wasn't wrapped in anger or cold. A teenage boy who helped skin the pelts, saving coins for a life somewhere else. An old sheriff who thought he had seen the worst of human nature years ago, back before he came north to be forgotten. People with hopes, regrets, and routines they relied on, small things they believed would stay the same forever. Every day felt almost the same. Wake up before dawn, fight the cold, and work until your hands go numb. Eat stew if you had it, salted meat if you didn't. Sleep, then do it all again. Yet something had started to shift, slow and quiet, like a storm forming over the horizon. The woods felt heavier. Tracks were found where no animal should have walked. The wind carried strange sounds at night, not wolves, not bears, something else. Something that made even the bravest men stay indoors and pretend they didn't hear anything at all. The trapper kept coming into town with more pelts than anyone else. Thick, heavy skins that traders paid well for, but when people touched them, something felt wrong. Not in the fur itself. It was soft, warm, almost beautiful. But something beneath it, something they couldn't name, made them pull their hands away too quickly, like touching something familiar and realizing it shouldn't exist at all. Still, no one said anything, not out loud. Suspicion was a dangerous thing here. Once spoken, it spread like fire, and a fire in winter could burn everything down. People tried to mind their own business. But the truth was, everyone in Birch Hollow lived close enough to the edge that they could feel when something was out of place. The town was small, but the silence between people had begun to grow. Eyes lingered too long on footprints in the snow. Doors stayed locked at night. And children were told not to wander past the tree line, not because of wolves, but because of a feeling the adults couldn't explain. The trapper didn't act any differently. He came in, sold his pelts, took his money, and went back into the woods. But there was a look in his eyes now, like someone who was always listening for a sound only he could hear. And when he left, people watched him go, wondering why the snow never stuck to his boots for long. Winter was settling in deeper, tightening its grip on every cabin, every breath. But underneath the cold, something else was alive, something that had been here longer than anyone knew. The trapper wasn't the first to hear it, but he was the first to obey it. And soon, the town would learn that some pelts aren't taken from animals. Some come from things that walk on two legs, and bleed and scream, and disappear without a trace. As the days turned into weeks, the cold deepened, and the silence of the forest began to feel heavier than before. Birch Hollow still woke before dawn, chopped wood, and still traded fur. But now, every visit from the trapper left a trace of unease behind. It wasn't just his pelts anymore, it was the way he looked at people, as if he was searching for cracks beneath their skin. The woman who ran the trading post was the first to notice something had shifted. The trapper used to walk in, drop his bundles, and leave without a word. But he had started watching her hands as she counted coins. Not her face, never her face, just her hands. She felt it every time, a cold stare like someone memorizing her veins. Once when she passed him his payment, their fingers almost touched. She pulled away fast and he smiled. Not a kind smile, a knowing one. Like he had already decided something she wasn't aware of. The teenage boy who helped skin Pelts tried his best to ignore the strange feeling in the air. He needed the money. He wanted to leave Birch Hollow before he ended up like the other men here, broken by cold, by silence, by a life that never changed. But the pelts from the trapper bothered him. When he sliced them open, he found odd things, stray threads, scraps of fabric, small beads tangled in the fur, nothing that belonged to an animal. The boy never said anything, but the more he worked, the more he wondered how far he'd go to get out of this town, and whether he already knew too much. The old sheriff began spending more time near the trading post whenever the trapper came in. He leaned against the wall, pretending to smoke, but really watching the man's every move. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that he'd seen eyes like that before in another place, another life. Eyes that held emptiness and hunger. Still, no one dared accuse the trapper of anything. Not openly, but whispers started spreading, quiet, sharp, growing like cracks beneath the snow. Then one day the trapper came in with a pelt no one had ever seen before. It was large, too large for a wolf, thick, dark, and strangely smooth. Everyone stared at it. The trader who came from outside town held it up, studying it with a scowl, trying to guess the animal. But he couldn't. No one could. Someone joked that maybe it wasn't an animal at all. The joke died before anyone laughed. That was the moment when fear began to replace suspicion. Around the same time, people in Birch Hollow started noticing other things, small things at first. A red ribbon frozen into the ground near the woods. A glove stuck high in a tree branch. Tracks that ended suddenly, as if the person walking had simply been lifted into the air. The teenage boy told the sheriff, but the sheriff only nodded, his jaw tight, eyes troubled. He remembered something from years ago, an old case. Similar woods, similar silence, bodies found without skin. He had told himself he came north to escape the memories. But memories had a way of following men, especially ones who knew darkness too well. Winter kept closing in. Food started running short. Pelts became more valuable than gold. The trapper began asking strange questions at the trading post, who lived alone, who traveled at night, who was planning to leave town when spring came. The woman behind the counter answered carefully, heart-pounding as she watched him absorb every word. One night, the teenage boy stayed late in the back room, cleaning knives and scraping hides. He heard footsteps outside, slow and steady. Then a knock, soft, too soft, like someone testing the wood instead of asking to come in. He stayed silent. The knock came again, followed by breathing, heavy, calm. He held still, barely daring to breathe until the sound faded into the night. The next morning, someone went missing. A logger who lived alone on the edge of town, known to be loud, rough, and impossible to scare. His cabin door was found open, snow blowing inside. His table was still set with last night's dinner. His coat still hung on the wall, but he was gone. And outside there were drag marks, long ones, deep ones, no animal tracks nearby, only boots, and then nothing. The sheriff followed the trail until it vanished deep in the trees. He came back pale, saying little. Something inside the town began to break after that. The silence wasn't just silence anymore, it was fear hiding in every room, every shadow, every night that felt too long. Doors were locked. Lanterns stayed lit until dawn. Men began sleeping with guns beside them. Parents kept children inside, some talked of leaving. But the snow was too deep now. Travel was nearly impossible. The trapper kept coming into town. And every time, someone watched him with a look that was half courage and half terror. Secrets were spreading now, quiet ones, people whispering past midnight. Someone heard the sheriff argue with the trader in the street, saying the pelts needed to be burned, not sold. The trader refused. He needed the money. Everyone did. Survival made people greedy. The woman at the trading post found herself thinking of the trapper at odd hours, wondering what he did out there alone, who he had been before he came here. She tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming. She wasn't afraid of him, not exactly. She was afraid of how little he seemed to need anyone. That kind of person could do anything and not feel it. Meanwhile, the teenage boy found himself changing too. He used to dream about leaving Birch Hollow. Now he dreamed of running without looking back. He started hiding coins, food, anything he could carry. But he also started watching people more closely. He saw fear in their eyes and something darker, resentment. Someone would snap soon. Someone always did. The trapper stayed calm through it all, calm in a way that made no sense. He didn't flinch at the missing man. He didn't care when people whispered. If anything, he seemed more at ease, like a storm had finally started and he was the only one prepared to walk through it. The sheriff drank more now. His hands shook. He sat by the fire at night, staring into flames, thinking of skin, how it can be removed cleanly if someone knows how. He thought of the trapper's perfect pelts, the way he never seemed tired, never seemed cold. He thought of the men who went missing years ago. And he thought of what he might have to do now. One night, as wind lashed the cabins and branches cracked under snow weight, the sheriff stood outside the trapper cabin. He didn't knock. He just stood there, staring at the small window, at the faint flicker of firelight inside. He considered going in. He considered walking away. In the end, he walked into the dark, boots crunching slowly across the frozen ground. A decision postponed but not forgotten. Far away, the trapper sat inside, skinning something that was still warm. Something that once had a voice. The smell of blood hung thick in the air, but he didn't mind. He had work to do. Winter was long, the town was full, and not everyone would survive the season. People thought they understood hunger. They didn't, not yet. But they would. Snow fell in thick, slow flakes that night, covering everything in a quiet white that made the whole world feel muffled. Birch Hollow looked peaceful from a distance. Lanterns glowing inside windows, smoke rising straight up from chimneys, no wind, no sound. But inside those cabins, no one slept easily anymore. Fear had become part of every breath. People kept their coats on even indoors, boots by the door, guns close. The town felt less like a home, and more like a place waiting for something terrible to happen. The sheriff was the only one still out past midnight, walking alone with a lantern in his hand and a gun under his coat. He had made up his mind. He wasn't going to wait for another person to vanish. He was going to the trapper cabin, not to talk, not to question. He told himself he was ready to end this, whatever this truly was. But he wasn't alone in his thinking. Earlier that evening, the teenage boy had gone to the trading post with a secret in his pocket. A scrap of leather he'd found buried beneath fur, the kind that didn't come from an animal. He had shown it to the woman who worked there. She stared at it too long, didn't speak at first, then whispered the truth neither of them wanted to say. This looked like human skin. They both knew what it meant. And both knew they couldn't tell the townsfolk, not yet. People were already one breath away from breaking. If word spread too quickly, it would turn into mob panic, or worse, blind violence aimed at the wrong person. Still, they couldn't do anything. The woman loaded a rifle. The boy took a knife and a lantern. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Fear had become its own kind of language. They followed the sheriff's path, moving through the woods with snow crunching softly underfoot. The trapper's cabin stood far from town, deep enough that the trees swallowed nearly all light. Smoke drifted from the chimney. A warm glow came through the cracks in the boards. The place should have looked inviting, but it didn't. It looked like a trap built from silence. Inside, the trapper worked at a table, blade in hand, sleeves rolled up, blood on his wrists. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't hiding. He was humming quietly, something slow and almost gentle. On the table lay a shape under a fur. The shape was too long for an animal. The hair didn't belong to a bear or wolf. It was human, brown, braided. A woman from the town, gone 2 days now. The sheriff stepped inside without knocking, gun raised. His voice cracked when he spoke, not from fear, but from the weight of all his memories pouring back at once. It ends tonight. The trapper didn't stop. He didn't turn. He just smiled to himself and said, "You came too late. You always come too late." The sheriff stepped closer, boots leaving wet prints across the wooden floor. The smell inside the cabin was thick, iron, sweat, something sweet and sickening. His heart hammered in his chest. He had seen death before. He had seen bodies. But this was different. This was creation twisted into something monstrous. Outside, the woman and the boy crept up to the window, peering in. Their breath froze on the glass. They saw everything, the body, the blade, the sheriff trying to keep his hand steady. The boy felt cold crawl up his spine, deeper than the winter air. He gripped the knife. He didn't feel like a boy anymore. He felt like someone who knew something could break inside a person and never come back. The trapper finally turned, eyes calm, almost empty. He didn't look afraid. He didn't even look angry. He looked like someone who had accepted the end long before it arrived. "You don't understand," he said. "Skin keeps stories, it remembers fear, pain, it holds on, animals forget, people don't." The sheriff didn't answer. His finger tightened on the trigger. But the trapper moved fast, faster than anyone expected. The blade flashed. The sheriff fired. A gunshot exploded in the tiny cabin, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling. The sheriff fell back, grazed, blood blooming thick against his sleeve. The trapper lunged, knocking the gun away, pressing the blade close to the sheriff's throat. The sheriff's breath came sharp and ragged. He could smell the blood on the trapper's hands, human blood, still warm. He felt his heart pounding not from fear of death, but from rage. Rage that he hadn't acted sooner. Rage that he knew this kind of man and still tried to believe he could wait for proof. Outside, the woman screamed. It wasn't panic, it was fury. She crashed through the door, rifle raised, eyes wide and blazing. The trapper turned just long enough for the sheriff to shove him off. The blade clattered to the floor. The sheriff scrambled for the gun. The boy ran in behind them, knife drawn, too scared to think but too determined to run. For a moment everything froze. The trapper standing between them, 3 weapons pointed his way, blood on his hands, the fire crackling behind him. Then he laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't wild. It was soft, bitter, like he had known this moment was coming from the very beginning. "You think this ends with me," he said. "But you already carry it, the fear, the hunger, the need to survive at any cost. You all have it, you just hide it better." The woman pulled the trigger. The shot hit him in the chest. He staggered back, crashing against the table, knocking over the lantern. Fire spilled, catching on fabric, on wood, on the blood-soaked fur beneath it. The trapper fell, gasping, eyes still open, still smiling as if he saw something the others couldn't. Something that wasn't there, or maybe something that was. The boy turned away, shaking, tears burning hot against his cold face. The sheriff pressed a hand to his wound, glaring at the dying man on the floor. Not with triumph, not with relief, just exhaustion, deep and old. The woman stood still, rifle lowered, breath shaking, realizing what she had just done, what she had become to stop a monster. The fire spread fast, faster than any of them expected. The fur went up first, then the walls, then the ceiling. The trapper's body was swallowed quickly, burning away before the snow outside even melted. They backed away out into the cold night, watching the flames rise and light the trees in flickering orange. The cabin screamed as it collapsed, wood splitting, smoke rolling into the sky. No one spoke. They just stood there, 3 people bound together now, not by trust or hope, but by a crime they hadn't planned but couldn't undo. The sheriff knew they would never be the same. The woman knew she would never forget the sound of that shot. The boy knew he would leave Birch Hollow one day, but part of him would always be standing in front of that burning cabin. Behind them, the fire kept rising, bright against the snow, flames feeding on blood, wood, and secrets. Birch Hollow slept that night, unaware that something had ended and something else had begun. Because a crime doesn't die when the body does. It lives on, in memory, in fear, in the things people refuse to say out loud. And the skin of this story would stay with them forever. When the cabin finally collapsed, the fire crackled and hissed into a heap of glowing timber, sending smoke up through the pines. The flames didn't last long in the cold. Snow fell harder, hissing as it touched the embers, burying everything quickly: wood, blood, bone, truth. By morning, all that was left was a blackened shape on the ground, surrounded by silence that felt too heavy, too final. The sheriff, the boy, and the woman walked back to town in the dark. Not one of them spoke. Their boots sank deep into the snow, and the wind picked up, pushing at their backs like it wanted them gone from that place. They carried no proof of what had happened. Nobody, no weapon, only memories, only guilt. When they got back, no one was awake, or if they were, they pretended to be asleep. Birch Hollow had learned long ago that the best way to survive was to stay quiet and hope trouble passed by. But trouble doesn't vanish just because no one talks about it. The sheriff went home alone. He sat by his fire, cradling his wounded arm, staring at the flames. He wondered if he had finally done something right, or if he had simply repeated the same mistake he made years ago when he let a different man walk free because there wasn't enough proof. He told himself he did what he had to do. that this time, at least, no one else would die by the trapper's hands. But that didn't stop the nightmares. They came fast, one after another, visions of skin, of faces frozen in fear, of the trapper smiling through the smoke as if he'd won. The sheriff stopped sleeping. He stopped speaking to people. He drank to numb the dreams, and when that didn't work, he went out into the woods alone, walking the same path night after night, as if searching for something that would never be found. The woman at the trading post tried to return to normal. She opened her doors at dawn. She counted coins. She smiled when people greeted her. But inside, she felt changed. She had always been afraid of loneliness. Now she was afraid of silence. Silence was where her mind replayed the moment she pulled the trigger, the recoil, the shock in her arms, the way the trapper fell but didn't look surprised. She told herself she did it for the town, for survival, for the woman who never came home, for the logger who vanished. But late at night, when she washed her hands in cold water, she still saw blood there, no matter how many times she scrubbed. The teenage boy tried hardest to move on. He still skinned pelts. He still saved coins. But something inside him had closed off. He felt older, harder, like he'd lost something he couldn't name. He stopped dreaming of escaping to some faraway place. Instead, he dreamed about hands reaching through snow, begging to be remembered. He dreamed of the cabin burning and how no one would ever know the full story. He avoided the sheriff. He avoided the woman. They were reminders of something he wanted to forget, something he couldn't. Days passed, then weeks. The missing were never found. The trapper's name was spoken less and less, as if saying it might make something come back from the ashes. The town forced itself to return to normal, the way people do after storms, patching up damage, pretending nothing was permanently broken. But people changed. They watched strangers more closely. They locked their doors earlier. They buried their animals deeper. Parents kept children close. No one wandered near the trapper's land. Even animals seemed to avoid it. The fur trader returned months later, asking why one of his best suppliers had disappeared. No one gave a straight answer. Someone muttered that they had left. Someone else said he froze in the woods. Another said wolves got him. The trader frowned, sensing lies, but didn't press. He bought what pelts he could find, packed his wagon, and left quickly, as if the trees themselves were listening. News didn't travel fast in 1883, but rumors did. In another town, someone said a man up north was caught killing travelers for their skins. People shook their heads, said it couldn't be true. People always said that, until it was. Birch Hollow became quieter after winter ended. The river thawed. Birds returned. Spring tried to wash the fear away. But it didn't succeed. The town had seen what it never wanted to see, what a person could become when something inside them broke in a place no one could reach. The sheriff aged fast that year. His hair went gray. His hands shook. In his sleep, he spoke to things that weren't there. Some said he was cursed. Some said he was just tired. He stayed in his cabin more and more, staring at the forest through the window, waiting for something that would never come. The boy turned into a young man, quiet, watchful, carrying too much inside. He stopped talking about leaving, because now he knew the worst things didn't live out in the world. They lived inside people, and they could show themselves anywhere. The woman kept the trading post running, but there were moments when she caught herself staring at the door, half expecting the trapper to walk through it one last time. Not alive, not human, just as a shadow of something they never fully understood. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if they'd tried to arrest him instead of killing him, if he had confessed, if he had told them where the bodies were buried, if he had explained how a man learns to treat human skin like animal fur. But she knew better. Some things have no answers. The town never held a funeral, not for the victims, not for the trapper, not even in prayer. It was as if speaking it into the world would make it real again. They buried the story instead. But stories don't die. Not really. Years later, when new settlers came through, they found the scorched foundation of a cabin deep in the woods. No one could explain it. The sheriff was long gone by then. The trading post was run by someone new. The boy who had once held a knife now lived far away, but still carried the memory like a scar beneath his clothes. Birch Hollow survived the way small towns do, with silence, with forgetting, with pretending. But the truth stayed in the roots of the trees, in the soil under the snow, in the fear that sometimes woke people in the darkest hours of night. Because even after justice, even after fire, even after death, something of the trapper remained. Not his body, not his voice. Just the memory of a man who skinned what should never be skinned. and the knowledge that every person in that town now understood. Monsters don't come from nowhere. They grow quietly, in places where no one looks. They wear human faces, and sometimes they knock on the door. In the end, the aftermath of the crime brings a complex form of justice. Some individuals face legal punishment, while others are left to endure quieter, more personal consequences. Reputations fall, families break apart, and those once admired are now marked by disgrace. Even where the courts deliver sentences, the question remains, is justice ever truly served? Some carry guilt that no prison sentence can erase, while others refuse to accept responsibility at all, hiding behind denial or justification. The tragedy reshapes not just the lives of those directly involved, but the people around them, loved ones forced to live in the shadow of what happened, haunted by shame, grief, or unanswered questions. The crime does not end with the verdict. It lingers in memory, trauma, and silence. Beyond the individuals, society is forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The case becomes a mirror reflecting corruption, power imbalances, and the fragility of morality. Public trust weakens, institutions are questioned, and the media turns the crime into a spectacle, deepening the divide between justice and entertainment. Yet through this darkness, the story exposes deeper themes: how easily power can corrupt, how silence enables wrongdoing, and how complex human motivations truly are. In the end, the legacy of this crime is not only in the punishments given, but in the lessons left behind, that justice is imperfect, morality is fragile, and every choice echoes far beyond the moment it's made. The final shadow of the story is a reminder: no one walks away unchanged, and society must remember or risk repeating the same horrors again.